Breakfast is the most important meal of the day, but it's quickly becoming unaffordable. In the last 5 years, it's up 53 to 70% at major restaurants, and per NerdWallet, 28% for meals made at home. Today, my mission is to conquer breakfast and bring the average price down below $1 per plate. If you're looking to save money on everything from bagels to breakfast bowls, from hot chocolate to the flat white, I've got you covered. I am not a morning person, so breakfast is my least favorite meal of the day to cook. I was recently reflecting on how much simpler my freezer meal preps have made our really crazy, hectic ball schedule nights, and I decided to implement the same plan with breakfast, all with budget in mind. I will say from the start that this was a very busy day. In the future, I'll scale this a little bit differently. I will make some changes and some tweaks to this plan, but I'll share those nuggets with you as we go and as I cook. Today, we're jumping in with English muffins. Now, if you have ever made English muffins before, you know they can take some time. The recipe I'm using here is from the King Arthur baking website, and I'll make sure to link that link down below. I love their baking, but I do make some tweaks because I'm using freshly milled flour here, which does vary the recipe just slightly, but the main recipe will be down below. The first thing to know about English muffins is that their ingredients are super, super simple. There is not much hands-on time, but there is a lot of total time. So this recipe takes a total of 4 hours, but as you saw there, it took me just 3 or 4 minutes to throw together all the ingredients needed to get started. What you need for English muffins is flour, yeast, warm milk, and warm water. And that is the beginning stage of the recipe. Later, we'll add in salt, sugar, melted butter, and use some cornmeal for dusting, as well as a little more flour, but all very, very basic pantry ingredients. Now, while that is sitting, because it has to sit for about an hour and a half, I'm moving on to the next thing that I'm prepping, which is another baked good straight from the King Arthur website, and that's going to be bagels. Now, my girls absolutely love bagels, but when we go to the store to buy them, the price keeps creeping up. So I decided to make them at home. I have made them in the past, but it is something that takes, again, a little bit of time. Since I was going to be home on this specific day and tackling things like the English muffins with plenty of other things to go in between, I decided it was the perfect day to put some more bagels in the freezer. I am using freshly milled flour, as you can see back there in the back, and I'm weighing out all of my ingredients on a scale here in the front. I find that weighing ingredients is actually easier than using cups and teaspoons. And one reason is because you can measure everything into one vessel. So as you can see here, I'm just throwing all of my ingredients on top of each other by simply tearing off the weight of the scale in between, making sure to get the exact right amounts. Just like English muffins, bagels are another baked good that are very hands-off as far as their total amount of cook time, yet the total time takes about 3 hours start to finish. So make sure that you're starting this on a day when you have the time to put into it and have some other things planned around the house in between, so you're right there and ready to go when it's time. Now, I am just getting this mixed up in my Anchorstrom mixer. I can mix this recipe 3 or 4 times over and still have plenty of space in this mixer, which is one of the reasons that I got it. I really love to batch cook, and in the future, one of those nuggets that I was going to share with you is that I will probably triple or even quadruple this recipe just to put extras in the freezer as they go. The dough needs to knead for at least 10 minutes, so I just set the timer on my mixer, and you can see it all the way through there in my pantry, and came back to move on to our next recipe of the day. So as you can see, this is a day filled with back and forth, tons of kitchen time, but in the end, we had so many amazing meals. It was totally worth it. What I'm working on now is a brioche crock-pot French toast. Not only is this something that I'm going to put as a make ahead for actually our Christmas morning breakfast as a special request for my kiddos, but I'm also going to throw one in the crock pot right now so that we have dinner already prepared for the day. I have found that one of the secrets to making good crock pot French toast is that your bread cannot be too fresh. So what I'm doing here is taking the bread chunks and putting them on some sheet pans, and I'm going to toast them off in the oven for about 4 or 5 minutes to make sure that I don't have super soft, soggy bread. If you do, it will just turn into a big ball of mush in your crock pot with nice crispy, crunchy edges around the outside or the bottom of the pot, but it won't have that nice of a texture inside. And that's definitely something you want to avoid, specifically if you're doing it for a special morning breakfast, just like I'm doing for our Christmas breakfast coming up here just in a few days at this point. When I got the bread into the oven, it was time to check on that dough, and the bagel dough had finished up. So it was time to just put the lid on it, and you let it set for about an hour and a half until it gets just nice and puffy, not quite doubled in size. And speaking of ways to save on breakfast, it's time to start making some coffee and drinks of all kinds at home. And the best part is, you don't have to give up your favorite fancy coffees to make this happen. For pennies on the dollar, you can create everything from a hot chocolate with the automatic stir feature to a flat white, selecting the milk of your choice, whether it be plant-based or dairy, and the desired thickness of your foam. So while the dough is resting and my husband is away with the kids, I am looking at this as the absolute perfect opportunity to try and perfect a beautiful hot chocolate recipe that I can surprise everyone with on Christmas morning. Not only can I turn into a rich, luscious hot chocolate right here on my kitchen counter, but I was also able to make a pretty impressive foam using the hot cappuccino setting on this barista maker to add a beautiful, luscious, rich, amazing frothy milk for the top. And the awesome news is you can keep the same cafe quality in mind that you're come to expect and love using the barista maker by Dreo. It can handle it all, from lattes and shakes, from cold foam to hot, and for less than many people spend a month at their favorite coffee shop. Not only can you save big on the cost, but also on the time because you can skip the drive-thru. Added bonus, cleanup is a breeze. Simply rinse this thing out and toss it in the dishwasher when you're done. And if you like to save big on your morning cappuccino, flat white, and more, the sky is the limit with this barista maker. So make sure to check out my link in the description and find a special code to save big today. And thank you again to Dreo for sponsoring today's video. As a quick side note, I am still perfecting that hot chocolate recipe. So if you have a favorite homemade recipe, if you would drop it down in the description, that would be amazing. Now it's time to turn our attention back to that French toast casserole. One of the very first things that you need to do after toasting the bread is make sure to butter the inside of your crock pot. Now, I know some people like crock pot liners. I personally do not like the liners. I don't like plastic close to my food or touching it in any way. That's personal preference. If you're interested in quicker cleanup and you aren't as concerned about plastics, don't worry about it. Just line the crock pot with your plastic liner and everything should be just fine. Now that my bread is all toasty and ready to go, I'm putting half of the bread that I cut up into this crock pot. The other half I will deal with here in just a moment. Now, as I'm adding the bread in here, you will notice I'm definitely not trying to crunch it down in there at all. I want it to stand up because here in a moment, I'm going to put all of these awesome ingredients in there and I want to really toss it and give it space so it's not turning into just a lump of soggy bread down in the bowl. But this recipe calls for 8 eggs, 2 cups of half and half, and some spices and seasonings to go along with it. Also, coarse sugar, vanilla, and I'm using a cinnamon blend that I already had made up with nutmeg and the other ingredients called for in the recipe. But if you do not have it already blended up, definitely go ahead and just use the cinnamon, nutmeg, and other spices called for in the recipe itself. Also, coarse salt to top it off and make it really balanced. And then as you can see here, I do have 2 bowls that I'm mixing up at the same time. I debated on how I wanted to do this. I considered just using 1 large bowl, doing all 16 eggs together, but I was concerned about my ability to do the perfect pour, and I didn't want to leave one of them short on egg and ingredients and leave one of them way heavy. So decided to do it in 2 separate bowls. In the future, I probably would do that the exact same way, just because it worked out super well, and then I didn't have to worry about portions or what was going in. Now, once this is all mixed up and blended up and ready to go, you just pour the 1 portion into the crock pot and get it all tossed around really, really well. It takes about 3 hours. I put it on low because that's what the recipe said, but I didn't really feel like the edges were crispy enough for me. So I did turn it up to high, add an extra hour, and just kind of monitored it till the doneness of my liking. I did use a different recipe previously that called for the bread to soak at least an hour in the refrigerator before going into the crock pot to make sure it really got nice and saturated. I find that it works really well either way. It doesn't really matter. So if you're in a hurry like I am on this specific day, just go ahead and throw it in the crock pot and it will be good to go. Reason that I'm throwing this in the crock pot is anytime that I'm being super adventurous with my plan for the day in the kitchen, I try to put something in the crock pot so I have it ready to go when the evening is over and I don't have to make an entirely separate meal for my family on that evening. I find that more often than not at the end of a very long canning day or meal prep day, all you want to do is get out of the kitchen and call for takeout. So if I can set myself up early in the day to make sure that doesn't happen, my evenings go way better. So now that I have the first one processing, I am just going to take the second one and dump it into a Ziploc. This is going to go in my refrigerator. It actually went in there for about 24 hours. And then I moved it over to the freezer. I am saving this. I'll pull it out to thaw and put it in my refrigerator on Christmas Eve morning. And we have a ton of stuff going on that day. So I'll make sure to do it before we leave the house. And then it'll be ready to go in the crock pot the next day. Now, this does take 3 or 4 hours. So when I'm up early in the wee hours of the morning, I'm going to go ahead and pour it into the crock pot. But the only thing that I will have to do at that time is butter the crock pot itself and hit start. And that is the beauty of meal prepping and getting things ready in advance. Now, each one of these gave us about 10 servings. The meal itself is really, really delicious. My husband loved it with just butter with no syrup. Kids loved it topped with maple syrup. And we also found out that we had quite a few leftovers after using it just for one dinner. And the next morning, it was amazing. Now, this is one of those crockpot meals that might almost be better on day 2. And the reason is that I pulled it out of the crock pot, chunked it up into good portion sizes, and then put it in the oven to get crunchy on all sides. And it really just browned up beautifully. The kids could not take it. They wanted more and more. So we ended up finishing all of this off on the second morning and didn't have to worry about having breakfast that day because the meal prep was already done. When you pull it out of the oven after you warm it up, make sure to put a pat of butter on top of each portion. Oh my goodness, as it melted, it was so delicious. And my littlest one was sad because she couldn't see the butter on hers, but she could see the butter on others, just because it melts in so beautifully and tasted absolutely amazing. Not a shred left, not a bit goes to waste. Highly recommend that one. Of course, I will link the description down below, so you'll find the recipe there. Now we're moving on to something else that my kids absolutely love. This is a take on a country breakfast bowl. You can buy these at Walmart. Sometimes they have everything from eggs to bacon to sausage. Whatever you want to throw in a breakfast bowl really works. For my family, potatoes and onions that have been browned up in the oven until crisp, on the verge of too done, but today we're just going with crisp because I will be reheating them, are so delicious and loved. And we also really love sausage. And I actually already had some sausage meal prepped, so I'll show you how I integrated that in a little bit. But the first step here is just to cut up your potatoes and onions, drizzle them with oil, and get them in the oven. The recipe, I believe, said 400. I like to go with 425. Like I said, we like them crunchy, so turn it up and get them roasting. I do this a lot for dinners. Like we'll use these potatoes and onions with a sheet pan meal at night. In the future, this is one of those things I will not be doing on a big day like this. I am just going to make extra whenever I'm making them for dinner, set them aside and let them cool if I can keep the kids off. And then go ahead and set these breakfast bowls up to where they are constantly in the freezer because they are such an easy, very filling, delicious breakfast. And it is perfect way to go. We are back to the English muffins. They have set for a couple of hours. You can let them set anywhere from 1 hour to 4 hours. And the longer they set before you move on, the stronger the taste is that comes along with, or that English muffins are known for really. So this set a couple hours, and now I am moving on to adding the ingredients for the actual dough itself. So you need 1 extra cup of flour. All-purpose unbleached is what King Arthur asked for in the recipe. Of course, I'm adding just a freshly ground from my wheat berries, a teaspoon of salt, sugar, a tablespoon of melted butter, and 2 to 3 tablespoons of cornmeal, which we'll use in a little bit for dusting. The recipe specifically says wet hands or the skinny end or handle end of a wooden spoon. The dough is really tacky at this point, so wet hands would be the reason. That's the reason, or the suggestion, I should say, for the wet hands. The wooden spoon handle, I'm not really sure why that works, but it definitely did. Once you get the dough mixed together, you want to get it incorporated as much as you can into a nice little ball. You don't want to knead it too hard, but you definitely want to make what looks like a normal dough ball. Once you get it incorporated to that level, you're going to start basically doing a stretch and fold. You want to do this about every hour for a couple of hours, and it just takes, 2 minutes to do this, but it is part of why making something like this takes so long at home. So stretch it 5 or 6 times around the bowl, just turning a quarter time every single time, and tuck it over. And once you get that accomplished to a level where it's kind of hard to turn anymore, you want to just put it in the middle of your bowl, kind of cup it into a round shape, cover it, and set it to the side. Now it's time to jump back to the bagels. Now the process of these two is pretty similar. So the next time I do a big batch breakfast day, I think what I'll tackle is just the English muffins and the bagels, so I can have a little bit of time out of the kitchen to do other things. I think it'll just make my day go a little bit smoother. But one thing I will do is make sure to quadruple this recipe so I can make the most out of the yield that I'm getting from one day in the kitchen. So the only thing you have to do to the bagels at this point is go ahead and take your dough and cut it up. Now I am making 8 bagels out of this. You can go smaller and make 12 if you want. I really should have done that. My girls really love the mini bagels, but with the larger size, we're able to just cut them in half and share them. So it's really not that big of a deal. To do this, I just cut it in half and cut it in half until I get the number of bagels that I'm looking for. And then once I get the dough balls together, I just kind of form a really nice tight ball. Repeat this until you have accomplished that with every dough ball that you have. And then once that's done, same process. You cover it and you wait. But this time, instead of using a towel, I'm using plastic wrap because it is specifically requested in the directions. This helps to keep the moisture in. You can also use a wet tea towel, and sometimes I've done that in the past, but I wanted them to be super warm. This keeps the moisture and the heat in, which I felt like would be a good asset with the time schedule that I was on at this particular time. If you are using a towel, sometimes it takes just a little bit longer, so just know that when you're planning ahead. But if you're ever caught without plastic wrap, or you just like to avoid it, which I quite honestly personally do, I just didn't avoid it on this specific day, just know that that tea towel will work for you. In the meantime, my potatoes needed a flip. As you can see here, they are not quite done, but I gave them a good scrape and flip around on my tray and put them back in. But I also got the water started for the bagels. Now, when you are making bagels, they are a little bit different than most breads because you have to boil them. So you need 2 quarts of water, a wide pan. So wide and shallow works best because you're trying to get about 4 in there at a time. You also don't need it too deep, but you need to be able to get them out. So a wide pan, you're putting 2 tablespoons of brown sugar and 1 tablespoon of regular sugar in and bringing that to a really gentle simmer. Now, in the meantime, it was time for another stretch and fold of those English muffins. I will say I've made English muffin recipes in the past where I didn't have to do all the stretch and folds, but they did not turn out near as well as these in the end. So spoiler alert, definitely recommend this process. It is totally worth it. Like I said, I would just make sure to do more than one batch if you're doing it, if you're going to invest that time, because that way when your kids come in and they want, 4 or 5 of them the next day and 4 or 5 of them the next day, you're not sad because they're all gone already. They're that good. You're going to want more, and they freeze beautifully. So to shape my bagels, now that they are ready to go, you can see here, I'm trying a few different techniques. That one got a little bit away from me. Basically, poke your finger in, make a nice hole, and then you just want to swirl it around until it gently stretches out. The thing about bagels is you want the hole to be bigger than you think because it will swell and they will kind of puff up during the cooking process. So if you have a really tiny hole, you're not going to come out with a hole at all. Now, for my little ones who love to cover in the whole thing with cream cheese, that's a hit. But for me, I personally like a pretty good size hole in the middle of my bagel. So when you're making them at home, you really have the ability to customize and do what works right for you. So just take that advantage and leeway and know that however you prefer your bagels is exactly how they'll come out when you're making them at home. Once you get them all shaped and stretched out to your desired level of bagel hole size, then you just start putting them in the water bath. You do not want a rapid boil. You want a nice, gentle simmer. and you're looking for a couple minutes on the first side and then 1 minute on the second side. You do not want to completely cook them at this time, but this is what gives bagels that chewy texture. So it's really important that you go ahead and take this step. Otherwise, you're just looking at a round piece of bread, which is not the purpose when you go through all the effort to make a bagel. Once you have completed boiling all of the bagels, you want to go ahead and put them into the oven. It's going to take around 20 minutes to finish them up. You want to look at them a little before 20 minutes and make sure to flip them halfway through. So around 10 minutes, I flip them over. Around 18 minutes, you want to start looking to make sure that you like the color. I did put these on a metal baking sheet. I really wish I would have used my baking stone. The reason that I did not is because I had the potatoes on one of them in the oven and they're slightly smaller than my half sheet. So I knew I could get all of them on my metal half sheet pan. That's the reason it went that direction. In the future, I will definitely use my stone. I do think it makes a nicer bread product in the end. So just kind of throwing that out there. It is going to impact the texture of your bagel just slightly, depending on what kind of material you're putting them in the oven. Now, while that was processing and while I was waiting to get those in the oven, I went ahead and grabbed out my meal prep containers for the country breakfast bowls. So all of the potatoes I divided by 5 containers. I really could have got 6 servings out of this if I had another container ready to go, but at the time I didn't. And now I'm going to add in some of my sausage. Now, what I do with my sausage is I go ahead and cook it up and then I let it cool and freeze it. I freeze it flat so then I can easily just break out what I need. If I'm making pizza or anything else, I have it ready to go. I often do this with breakfast egg scrambles, but I'm just breaking it up by slamming it on my cabinet. It's, what it is. It is what it is, right? That's real kitchen. So slamming it on my cabinet to get it broken and then just putting as much as will fit in these individual containers. These will go in the freezer just as is. You can either pull them out the night before and defrost them, or you can defrost them on the defrost setting on your air fryer or microwave for a couple minutes and then go ahead and cook them to warm. Now, I did skip the eggs in these. Normally, when you buy a breakfast bowl, they have eggs, but I have a couple kids that are super picky, and I can always just scramble up an egg really quick and throw it in if I want to, or leave them out completely. So again, it's about the service to your family. You do not have to follow the recipe specifically, just do what works for you. But do know that in the end, when I'm giving you all the price comparisons here in a moment, I did factor all of the eggs and cheese that would go into them, just like a Jimmy Dean breakfast bowl, for the sake of price comparison. Now it's time to go back to the English muffins. Did I mention this was a long, busy day in the kitchen? I hope you have seen that and got the idea. This was absolutely nonstop. I did start around 11, so you can see the lights changing. It's getting darker outside. I don't know why I seem to never be able to start these projects before 11. Definitely recommend that you do if you're going to do it. But like I said, here we are anyway. Moving on to the last step with the English muffins. What you want to do is pat your dough out to be about a 1/2 inch thick, and then you're going to cut out 4 rounds. That's about all I could get with this dough. You don't want to press on it too hard and completely deflate it, so you want to be pretty gentle with it. That 1/2 inch thickness is about the right mark. And as you can see here, it's so soft that I can't really pick them up easily. So I'm using my dough bench scraper to go ahead and pick them up and move them over to a parchment paper where they can go ahead and lay until they rise. So I repeated this process, went ahead and took the ball that was left and made 2 more. One I was able to easily go ahead and use the cutter on, and the last one I just kind of formed into the correct shape. So don't really feel like you have to get it all cut out perfectly. I will tell you, looking at them in the end, I could not tell which one I did with the cutter and which one I just kind of free-handed with what was left. So don't worry about something like that. It's really not going to make that big of a difference in the end. Once you get them all formed, again, cover them and let them rise for just a little bit. I think I give them about 30 minutes here, and then we will get them cooked up. Now let's talk pricing. Now, the goal here, remember, was to get everything under $1 per serving. And when you're taking a look at something like the bagels, my bagels were 23 cents each. Now, that's pretty incredible when you consider at Panera, your bagel alone is going to cost $2.39. And even at the grocery store, it's 67 cents each. That means the Panera bagel is a 10x markup, and the store bagel is still a 3 times markup. So when you consider the savings that you can make just by doing a few things at home, it really is incredible. Moving on to English muffins. I know this isn't something that you normally get out alone, so I went ahead and priced it from McDonald's with sausage and cheese. So the price of that's around $2.67. I can make it at home for 89 cents. That does include the sausage and the cheese. The English muffin itself was 21 cents. Anytime you're looking at a baked good, there is so much markup. It is absolutely crazy. So that is 3 times the savings just by making it at home instead of buying it out. I also did not include prices based off of my insane grocery haul that you saw me get a few weeks ago, where I was able to get my pre-cooked sausage patties so incredibly cheap. I went ahead and used the Walmart pricing that you can find online right now. If you'd like to see how I save big on my groceries, I'll make sure to link that for you at the end because I saved so much money by grabbing that stuff already put together. Now, the next thing I'm going to price for you are those breakfast bowls. Now, I priced them against the Jimmy Dean breakfast bowl that has sausage, potatoes, cheese, and egg. So I made sure to go ahead and incorporate the price of the egg and cheese, even though I left it out because I want you to have a good comparison. Jimmy Dean version that you can get at Walmart is $2.87 currently, and I can make it at home for $1.20 with eggs and cheese. Even cheaper if you consider that I might just be using those leftover potatoes from a normal meal that we're having at home. So really taking advantage of what you have going on and what you have available is a huge way to save money. That's about a 2.5 times savings over the purchase price at the store. Those 5 breakfast bowls at $1.20 were my most expensive cost per serving of the entire day's cook. Now, taking a look at the crock pot French toast, that came out to 97 cents per serving, even pricing in my organic maple syrup. So what I'm trying to say there is you can do it way cheaper. I hope you're starting to get the theme that when you take a little bit of time and cook at home, you can save big. And speaking of a big savings, let's not forget that hot chocolate. Even for the smallest one I could grab at McDonald's because I couldn't get Starbucks pricing online, it was $3.49. Whereas I can make it at home for 40 cents max. If you're interested in grabbing a barista maker, make sure to check the description and save all of the money that you can today. And if you're interested in more budget saving grocery tips, make sure to check out this video right here.